In this video, I'd like to talk about the creation-evolution debate. I might as well tell you straight away that I am an evangelical Christian and a creationist. However, when I say I'm a creationist, that does not necessarily mean that I believe in taking Genesis chapter 1 literally. I don't despise the idea of a literal interpretation of Genesis 1. I think it is not impossible, but I'm just not personally sure that I would want to dogmatically insist on that, and I'm not a tremendous expert in these matters anyway. Also, the fact that I'm a creationist does not exactly mean that I think Darwin was wrong. Of course finches with long beaks will survive and finches with short beaks will die out if the conditions are conducive to that. And yes, of course, black moths on a dark background are more likely to survive than white moths. And yes, of course, when a predator is chasing a herd of animals, the slower animals are more likely to be caught than the faster ones. I don't think that there is any doubt that the ideas of natural selection and survival of the fittest are correct. What is much more contentious is whether adaptation merely takes place within species or whether one species or type of animal can change into another. I understand that not many intermediate species have been found, and many more should have been found if there has been continuous evolution of one species into another. Archaeopteryx is said to be an intermediate form, but the creationist could argue that this species is a fully functioning bird. Another difficulty with the theory of evolution is that presumably, since change occurs by means of individual mutations, changes can only occur one at a time. It is difficult to imagine how complicated bodily structures could form by means of one change or mutation at a time over a long period of time, when there would presumably be no advantage in terms of natural selection until the structure is fully formed. How could a dinosaur evolve into a bird? For flight to take place, presumably a number of different changes have to occur. So how could the mutations for these changes all occur at once? If only some of them occur, the animal would still not be able to fly, and so there would be no advantage in terms of natural selection. Another question is whether positive mutations take place at all. When a mutation takes place, it usually involves a loss of function, although sometimes this may actually provide a survival advantage to the organism. If positive mutations take place at all, they are probably very rare. Another issue is whether additions can be made to DNA. Presumably, to transform an amoeba into a human being, you would need to make a lot of additions to the DNA, since the DNA for a human being is much more complicated than the DNA for an amoeba. Is it possible for this to happen, and how would it happen? I also wonder whether change has really been smooth and gradual anyway. For example, I understand that you have the Cambrian explosion, where a lot of new species suddenly appear in the geological record. There is also the question of whether the Earth is as old as scientists say it is, or whether the idea of a young Earth is valid after all. Can we be absolutely sure that procedures such as potassium-argon dating are correct? Must nuclear isotopes always decay at the same rate, or could they have decayed at a different rate if conditions were different earlier in the Earth's history? And besides, how do we know how much of the substance was there to start with? Now, I am certainly not claiming to be a great scientific expert, and there may be possible answers to some or all of these objections. If you think you can deal with these objections, I don't mind hearing from you. But even if there are answers to these objections, Darwin's theory of natural selection still cannot possibly be an alternative explanation to creation, simply because natural selection cannot begin to work until the organism is already there. The DNA molecule has to be there already. The capacity to feed and reproduce must be there already. The second generation must already be there. The enormously complicated procedure within the cell to specify protein manufacture from the DNA molecule must already be there before natural selection can take place. So it seems that there are only two possible means by which the first organism could have come into existence. Either God created it, or else it must have somehow assembled itself without the help of natural selection. In recent decades, scientists have found out just how amazingly complicated the cell is, and so the idea of self-assembly seems rather far-fetched. It is probably true to say that the DNA molecule, even for the simplest cell, is equivalent to a 600-line computer program. Moreover, for a protein to form, you can't just throw the amino acids together in a random manner. Each amino acid has to go in just the right position in the protein, or else the protein will not be able to fulfill its function as an enzyme or as a component of the structure of the cell. And even the simplest protein is composed of about 100 amino acids, which means the chance of it being formed from a jumble of amino acids is vanishingly small. Furthermore, you need about 600 of these proteins to form even the simplest of cells. Maybe the first verse of the Bible isn't so unreasonable after all. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. Anyway, I hope this video will be a useful summary of possible arguments against evolution, and please feel free to comment if you think that there are flaws in my arguments, and thank you for watching.